Sometimes the life you're running from is the only thing standing between you and the life you were meant to live. Clara Weston learned that truth in the high country, where the air is thin and second chances come quiet as snowfall. She arrived at Jed Holt's mountain homestead with nothing but a worn satchel and a heart full of secrets, seeking work, not love. The locals whispered she wouldn't last a week. Jed Holt was a man of few words and fewer smiles, a widower who'd buried his heart alongside his wife years ago. On her first morning, Clara looked him square in the eye and said, "I'm not here to marry, I'm here to work." His answer came low and steady. "Good. Ain't no room for quitters here, married or not." But could two broken souls find healing in shared labor and long mountain nights? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach had left Clara at the bottom of the mountain pass 3 days ago. 3 days of walking, sleeping under pine branches, rationing the bread and dried meat she'd packed in Denver. Her boots, fine leather bought for city sidewalks, had blisters on blisters now. The worn satchel that held everything she owned in this world cut into her shoulder with every step upward. But Clara Weston had not come this far to turn back. The morning she'd fled Denver, she'd left behind a 4-story brownstone on Larimer Street, a wardrobe full of silk dresses, and a life that had been slowly suffocating her. Richard Thornton's ring had sat on her finger like a shackle. He'd proposed 3 months after her father died, when the grief was still raw and she was vulnerable. A prominent banker, well-connected, respectable. Her father's friends had called it a fortunate match. Clara had called it surrender. Richard's love had come with conditions. She would manage his household, not his books, despite her gift with numbers. She would entertain his associates, wear the dresses he preferred, smile at his jokes. When she'd suggested keeping her father's small accounting practice alive, Richard had laughed, a cold sound that held no humor. "My wife won't work," he'd said, as though the matter was already settled. But Clara's father had raised her different. John Weston had taught his daughter to read ledgers before she could read poetry, to balance books and split firewood with equal competence. When her mother died, bringing a stillborn son into the world, it had been just the two of them, against the prairie. He'd never once told her she couldn't do something because she was a woman. He'd told her she could do anything if she was willing to work for it. Losing him had been like losing her compass. For 3 months, she'd drifted in Richard's orbit, letting him make decisions, plan their future, until the night she'd overheard him talking to his business partner. "She'll settle down once we're married," Richard had said. "Women always do." And that farm property her father left. "Once it's legally mine, we can sell it for a nice profit." Clara had walked out that same night. She'd taken her mother's cameo, her father's pocket watch, 3 plain dresses, and enough money for a stagecoach ticket. The advertisement she'd seen in the general store had been Providence, housekeeper wanted, remote mountain homestead. Must be hardy and self-sufficient. Inquire at Ironwood Valley. Now, as the path finally leveled and the valley opened before her, Clara understood what remote truly meant. The homestead sat in a meadow carved from wilderness, surrounded by peaks that still held snow despite the late spring warmth. The cabin was solidly built, chinked logs, a stone chimney, a covered porch that faced east to catch the morning sun. A barn stood 50 yards distant, and she could see chickens scratching in a wire pen, a small herd of goats grazing on the hillside. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was home. Clara's heart hammered as she approached. She'd sent no telegram, had no confirmation that the position was still available. For all she knew, she climbed 3 days into these mountains for nothing. A man emerged from the barn before she reached the porch. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in his surroundings, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing work clothes that had seen countless washings. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his dark hair touched with grey at the temples. He looked to be in his late 30s, maybe 40. When his eyes met hers, Clara felt the assessment in his gaze. Not unkind, but thorough. "Measuring. Help you?" His voice was deep, economical with words. Clara straightened her spine, ignored the screaming pain in her feet. "I'm here about the position, housekeeper." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, though he hid it quickly. "That advertisement's 3 months old. I know. I'm hoping you haven't filled it yet." She set down her satchel, met his eyes squarely. "My name is Clara Weston. I can cook, clean, mend, garden, and keep books if you need it. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I don't quit on my word." He studied her for a long moment. Clara resisted the urge to fidget under that steady gaze. She could see him, taking in her blistered hands, her dusty clothes, the determination that must be written all over her face. "Jed Holt," he said finally. "You walk up here?" 3 days from where the stage let me off. His eyebrows rose slightly. "Alone?" "Yes, that was foolish. Maybe," Clara conceded. "But I'm here, and I need work." "Do you still need a housekeeper, Mr. Holt?" Jed looked back toward the cabin, then at her again. Something in his expression suggested this was a conversation he hadn't expected to have. "Place hasn't had a woman's touch in 5 years. I manage well enough, but I won't lie. It could use some tending. Work's hard up here. Days are long. Winter comes early and stays late." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Clara repeated. "Kitchen's yours to run. You'll handle the house, the garden, the chickens, the preserving. I'll manage the barn, the stock, the heavy labor. Meals at sunup and sundown. I'll pay you fair wages, room and board included." He paused, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I keep to myself, Miss Weston. I'm not looking for company or conversation. Just honest work. That suits me fine, Mr. Holt. I'm not here to marry. I'm here to work." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Good. Ain't no room for quitters here, married or not." He turned toward the cabin, and Clara picked up her satchel and followed. Her new life was beginning. The inside of the cabin surprised her. She'd expected bachelor chaos, dishes piled in the sink, dust thick on every surface, disorder everywhere. Instead, she found stark simplicity. Everything had its place. The main room held a stone fireplace, a handmade table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair near the hearth. The kitchen area was basic but functional. A cast-iron stove, open shelves holding dishes and provisions, a dry sink with a water pump. Clean but impersonal. Like a way station, not a home. "Your room's up there." Jed pointed to a ladder leading to a loft space under the eaves. "Not much, but it's private. I sleep down here." He gestured to a door on the far wall. Clara climbed the ladder and found a small space with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a single window that looked out toward the mountains. Simple and spare, but after 3 nights sleeping on the ground, it looked like luxury. When she climbed back down, Jed had filled a basin with water from the pump. "You'll want to wash up. Supper's in an hour. We'll talk details then." He went back outside, leaving Clara alone in the quiet cabin. She washed her face and hands, the cold water a blessing against her sunburned skin. Through the window she watched Jed moving between the barn and the goat pen, his movements efficient and practiced. A man who'd learned to do everything himself. Around his neck, just visible at the open collar of his work shirt, she glimpsed a leather cord. Something hung from it beneath the fabric, resting against his heart. Clara turned away from the window and began exploring her new domain. The pantry held basics: flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork. The root cellar was nearly empty, winter stores depleted. The garden plot outside was overgrown with weeds, waiting for someone to bring it back to life. She could work with this. She could make this place a home, even if it wasn't hers. Even if the man who owned it clearly wanted to keep the world, and her, at arm's length. As she began preparing supper from what she found, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in months: purpose. Her hands knew this work. Her father had taught her to make much from little, to find satisfaction in a job well done. Whatever she was running from, whatever waited behind her in Denver, it couldn't reach her here. In this remote valley beneath these mountains, Clara Weston had found sanctuary. She just didn't know yet that she'd found something far more precious: the possibility of home. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt older than time itself. Clara woke before dawn to the sound of Jed starting the fire downstairs. By the time she climbed down from the loft, coffee was already brewing, and he was heading out to tend the animals. She'd have breakfast ready when he returned. Biscuits, eggs from the chickens, occasionally salt pork or gravy. They ate in companionable silence, then went their separate ways to their work. Clara attacked the neglected homestead with purpose. She scrubbed floors that hadn't seen proper attention in years, beat dust from curtains, scoured pots until they gleamed. The garden became her special project. She turned the soil, pulled weeds, planted seeds she'd found stored in the barn, beans, squash, carrots, potatoes. Her hands grew calloused, her arms stronger. The city's softness melted away under the mountain sun. Jed watched her work with what seemed like cautious approval. He was a man of few words, but Clara learned to read his silences. A nod meant she'd done well. A slight furrow between his brows meant concern. The rare occasions when his expression softened, usually when he didn't think she was looking, those moments felt like small victories. She learned his routines, his preferences. He took his coffee black and strong. He liked his meals simple and substantial. He spent every evening before bed checking the animals one final time, regardless of weather. And sometimes, late at night, she'd hear him leave the cabin and walk up the hillside behind the homestead. She never followed, but she knew where he went. She'd seen the small fenced area up there, the wooden cross weathered grey by mountain storms. They spoke little beyond what was necessary. "Need me to ride to town for supplies next week," he'd say. "Yes, sir," she'd reply and make a list. "Storm coming in," he'd announce, studying the sky. "I'll bring in extra wood," she'd answer. It was a dance of practicality, each learning the other's steps. But Clara was curious by nature, and the cabin held mysteries. On her third week, with Jed occupied repairing fence line on the far pasture, she decided to give the kitchen a thorough, deep cleaning. She'd been putting it off, sensing somehow that Jed wouldn't appreciate her disturbing too much. But dust was gathering in the high cupboards, and her orderly soul couldn't abide it. She pulled a chair over to reach the top shelf above the dry sink. Behind a stack of unused serving platters, her hand touched something wooden. She pulled it down carefully. A box, beautifully made from cherry wood, with delicate dovetail joints and a small brass clasp. Dust lay thick on its surface. Clara set it on the table and wiped it clean with her apron. The craftsmanship was exquisite. Someone had cared deeply about this box. She hesitated, knowing she should probably leave it alone. But the clasp was unlocked, and her fingers seemed to move of their own accord. Inside, she found recipe cards, dozens of them written in elegant feminine handwriting. "Sarah's apple butter," one read. "Holt family pot roast," said another. "Christmas sugar cookies, Mama's recipe." Each card was stained with use, annotated with small notes. "Add extra cinnamon, Jed's favorite, make double batch." Clara's throat tightened. This was her, Sarah, Jed's wife. Every card was a small window into a life that had been lived in this kitchen. Meals shared, love expressed through food and care. She touched the cards gently, feeling like an intruder in a sacred space. She was so absorbed in reading them that she didn't hear Jed return early, didn't hear his boots on the porch, the door opening. When his shadow fell across the table, she looked up with a start. "Mr. Holt, The expression on his face stopped her words. She'd never seen emotion crack through his careful control before. Now she saw it all. Shock, pain, something raw and terrible that made her take a step back. "Where did you find that?" His voice was rough, barely controlled. "The high cupboard. I was cleaning, I didn't mean to pry, He crossed the room in 3 strides and took the box from the table. His hands shook slightly as he held it. For a long moment he stood there, staring down at his late wife's handwriting, his jaw working like he was trying to form words that wouldn't come. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "I shouldn't have opened it." "No." The word came out harsh. "You shouldn't have." He turned and walked out, taking the box with him. The door didn't slam. Somehow that would have been easier. Instead, it closed with careful control, which was worse. Clara stood frozen in the kitchen, her heart hammering. She'd crossed a line she hadn't even known was there. The afternoon stretched long and tense. Jed didn't come in for the midday meal. Clara prepared supper as usual. But when the sun began to set and he still hadn't appeared, worry gnawed at her. She'd seen his face. That wasn't just anger. It was grief, fresh as if the loss had happened yesterday instead of 5 years ago. She found him on the hillside as the last light faded from the sky. He sat on the ground beside the grave, the recipe box open on his lap. Cards were spread around him like fallen leaves. He didn't look up when she approached, but he didn't tell her to leave either. Clara sat down a respectful distance away, hugging her knees to her chest. The evening air was cool, bringing the scent of pine down from the higher peaks. She waited, giving him the space to speak first, or not speak at all. Finally, his voice came low and rough. Sarah died 5 years ago this coming winter. Storm came up sudden while she was checking the trapline. Whiteout conditions. She knew these mountains better than anyone, but the cold... He stopped, swallowed hard. I found her the next morning. She'd tried to make it back, got within a quarter-mile of home. Just not quite close enough. Clara's eyes burned. I'm so sorry. These recipes, he touched one of the cards. She made every one of them. She loved to cook, loved to feed people, had this way of making a simple meal feel like a celebration. His voice cracked slightly. I put the box away after she died. Couldn't stand to look at her handwriting, knowing I'd never taste her cooking again. You loved her very much. She was everything. He looked at Clara finally, his eyes red-rimmed. I failed her. Should have been with her that day. Should have checked the weather more carefully. Should have... You can't know that, Clara said softly. Sometimes storms come up fast. Sometimes people die, and there's no one to blame. It's just life. Cruel and unfair. Jed shook his head. You don't understand. My mother died when I was 12, Clara said. Childbirth. The baby, too. A brother I never got to know. My father blamed himself for years. Said he shouldn't have gotten her with child again. Shouldn't have let the midwife handle it instead of fetching the doctor. But Mama told me before she died that she'd chosen this. Chosen to try for another baby, knowing the risks. She said some things in life are worth the risk even when they go wrong. She paused, then continued. My father died 6 months ago. Art gave out while he was working in the barn. I found him, and I blamed myself too. Should have made him rest more, should have seen the signs, should have done something different. But grief makes us believe we had more control than we did. The truth is, we can't protect the people we love from everything. We can only love them while we have them. Jed was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier. She made me promise that last morning. Made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, I wouldn't close myself off from the world. Wouldn't let the mountains swallow me whole. He gave a bitter laugh. Haven't done a very good job keeping that promise. You're still here, Clara said. Still tending this place. Still living. That counts for something. He gathered the recipe cards carefully, placing them back in the box. I'm sorry I snapped at you. You didn't deserve that. You were hurting. I understand. He stood, offered his hand to help her up. When she took it, his grip was warm and solid. For a moment, they stood there on the hillside, hands clasped, connected by shared grief and understanding. Come on, Jed said finally. Supper's probably cold by now. I can heat it up. They walked back to the cabin together in the gathering dark. Something had shifted between them. The wall Jed kept between himself and the world had developed a crack. Not broken, not yet. But Clara had glimpsed what lay behind it, and she understood now that she wasn't just working for a widower trying to maintain his homestead. She was standing on ground made sacred by loss. And if she stayed, when she stayed, she would have to learn to walk carefully, to respect the ghost that still lived in this place alongside them. The recipe box went back in the high cupboard that night. But later, lying in her loft, Clara heard Jed moving around below, and she knew somehow that he'd taken just one card out. Tomorrow, she thought, she might ask him which recipe it was. And maybe, just maybe, she'd offer to help him make it. The next morning brought an unspoken understanding. Jed mentioned, as he came in for breakfast, that Sarah's pot roast recipe had always been his favorite. Clara nodded and said she'd noticed they had the right ingredients if he wanted her to try making it. His eyes met hers, a brief, grateful acknowledgement, and that was enough. The days settled into a new rhythm. one that held more ease than before. Jed still kept his distance, still spent his evenings walking the hillside. But now, when he came back to the cabin, he'd sometimes linger by the fire for a few minutes, warming his hands before retreating to his room. Small steps, but Clara recognized them for what they were. 3 weeks after the incident with the recipe box, Clara woke to a commotion in the barn. She dressed quickly and hurried out to find Jed kneeling beside a laboring ewe. The animal was in distress, her breathing labored, her eyes rolling with pain. "Twins," Jed said without looking up. "She's too small for it. Been trying for an hour to help her, but they're positioned wrong." Clara knelt beside him. Her father had raised sheep for a time, before they'd moved to Denver. She knew this work. "Let me try. My hands are smaller." Jed moved aside and Clara rolled up her sleeves. The work was difficult, messy, and required a delicacy that came from feel rather than sight. The ewe bleated pitifully, but Clara spoke to her in low, soothing tones while she worked. "I know, sweet girl. I know it hurts. We're going to help you. Just a little longer." It took nearly an hour. Jed brought her water, held the lantern steady, murmured instructions when she needed guidance. When the first lamb finally slipped free, Clara's arms were shaking with exhaustion, but there was still the second one. "You're doing fine," Jed said quietly. "Take a breath." The second lamb came easier, as if the first had cleared the way. 2 tiny creatures, wet and trembling, but alive. The ewe, exhausted, began to clean them with her tongue. Clara sat back on her heels, covered in blood and birth fluids, and felt tears streaming down her face. "You did good," Jed said, and there was warmth in his voice she'd never heard before. "Real good. Not many people could have saved all 3 of them." Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing more mess across her face. "My father taught me. He said there's no greater satisfaction than helping life into the world. Your father was a wise man." They cleaned up together in the pre-dawn darkness, working side by side in comfortable silence. When they finally went in for breakfast, the sun was just breaking over the eastern peaks. Clara felt exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. Over the next week, Jed's demeanor toward her shifted noticeably. He began teaching her things: how to read the weather by watching the way clouds formed over the peaks, how to track deer through the forest, which plants were edible and which would make her sick. It was like he'd decided she was worth the investment of his knowledge. "You planning to stay the winter?" he asked one afternoon as they repaired a section of fence together. Clara paused in her work, considering the question and all it implied. "If you'll have me, I'm not eager to go back down the mountain." "Running from something?" She met his eyes honestly. "Yes, but also running toward something. I just didn't know what it was until I got here." He nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense to him. "Winter's hard up here. Snows can trap us for weeks at a time. Need to be sure you're prepared for that." "I'm sure." A week later, Clara was pulling laundry off the line when a wagon rolled up the path. She recognized the driver, old Tom from the general store, who made supply runs to the remote homesteads once a month. But there was a stranger with him, a lean man in a dusty suit who looked out of place in the mountain valley. Jed emerged from the barn, his posture immediately wary. Clara gathered the laundry and moved closer, some instinct telling her this visitor meant trouble. "Jed," old Tom called out, "got a fellow here looking for a young woman. Thought you might know something, seeing as how you hired one a few weeks back." The stranger climbed down from the wagon, pulling a piece of paper from his coat. "Name's Harold Benson. I'm a clerk for Thornton Banking in Denver, looking for a Miss Clara Weston. Her fiancé is quite concerned about her whereabouts." Clara's blood went cold. Richard had found her. "What's your business with Miss Weston?" Jed's voice was level, but Clara heard the edge in it. "Mr. Thornton simply wishes to know she's safe, and to inform her that her presence is requested back in Denver to settle some business matters regarding her late father's estate." "The estate's settled," Clara said, stepping forward. All 3 men turned to look at her. "There's nothing left to discuss." Benson's eyes narrowed. "You are Miss Weston, then?" "I am, and I have no intention of returning to Denver. Mr. Thornton was most insistent." I don't care what Mr. Thornton insists on, Clara said, her voice sharp. I'm no longer engaged to him. I'm employed here, and I'm staying here. Benson looked between her and Jed, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Perhaps if we could speak privately, Miss Weston? No, Jed said flatly. The lady said she's not interested. I think that's clear enough. Mr. Thornton has resources, Benson said, a hint of threat in his tone. He's a determined man. So am I, Jed replied. And Miss Weston is under my employ and my protection. If Mr. Thornton has business with her, he can communicate through the mail like a civilized person. Now I think it's time you headed back down the mountain before the weather turns. Benson opened his mouth to argue, but old Tom cut in. Best listen to Jed, son. He's right about the weather, and besides, the lady's made her position clear. After they left, Clara stood in the yard, her heart still racing. Jed came to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. He won't give up, Clara said quietly. Richard doesn't like losing, especially not to someone like me. What did you run from? Jed asked. So Clara told him. About Richard's control, his plans to sell her father's property, the way he'd tried to remake her into something she wasn't. About overhearing that conversation. About walking out in the middle of the night, about the fear that had driven her into these mountains. Jed listened without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're safe here. I meant what I said about protection. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. Trouble comes whether we invite it or not," he said. Might as well face it with someone standing beside you. That evening, Clara was putting away some of Jed's clothes, shirts she'd washed and mended, when she noticed an old wicker basket in the corner of his room. It was filled with items that needed repair, shirts with torn seams, socks with holes, a jacket with a missing button. Months, maybe years of neglect. She carried the basket to the main room and set it by the rocking chair near the fire. After supper, while Jed was doing his evening rounds, she began to work through it. The simple, repetitive task of mending was soothing. There was something deeply satisfying about taking broken things and making them whole again. When Jed came back in, he found her with a shirt across her lap, needle moving in small, precise stitches. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know, but I want to." She looked up at him. "Everything deserves to be mended if it can be, even the things that have been broken for a long time." Understanding passed between them. They weren't just talking about torn shirts anymore. Jed sat down, in the chair across from her, picked up his whittling knife and a piece of wood. They worked in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them, two people learning slowly that being alone and being lonely weren't the same thing at all. The weeks after the storm brought a fullness to life at the homestead that Clara had never experienced. The physical landscape had transformed, everything green and growing, life bursting forth with abandon. But the transformation inside the cabin was even more profound. Jed was still careful, still respectful of boundaries, but the walls between them had crumbled. They talked now, really talked. In the evenings by the fire over meals, while working side by side, he told her about his childhood in Missouri, about coming west as a young man seeking something he couldn't name. She told him about the loneliness of being motherless, about teaching herself to be both daughter and son to a father who needed help running his business. They didn't touch beyond what was necessary for daily life, but the awareness was always there, a current running between them, charging the air whenever they passed close to each other. Clara threw herself into her work with renewed energy. The garden flourished. The chickens multiplied. She learned to make cheese that even Jed admitted was better than anything sold in town. The cabin was no longer just clean. It was a home, warm and welcoming, full of small touches that spoke of care and attention. One afternoon, while organizing the loft to make more storage space, Clara found the trunk she'd brought with her from Denver. She'd barely opened it since arriving, too focused on the present to look back at the past. But now, with everything feeling settled and right, she was curious. Inside, beneath her practical clothes and few precious keepsakes, she found the dress. the fine city dress she'd worn to parties, to dinners with Richard and his business associates, silk and lace, impractical for any life she'd ever want to lead. She pulled it out, holding it up to the light from the small window. It was beautiful. She remembered the dressmaker fitting it, remembered Richard's approving smile when she wore it, remembered feeling like a doll being dressed for display. She heard Jed's footsteps on the ladder and quickly folded the dress, but not quickly enough. "What's that?" he asked, climbing into the loft space. "Nothing. Just something from before." He came closer, and she unfolded it again, letting him see. "My city dress, the one I wore to all of Richard's functions." Jed studied it, then her. "You ever miss it, that life?" Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This dress cost more than most people earn in 3 months. But every time I wore it, I felt smaller, like I was disappearing inside it, becoming exactly what Richard wanted me to be. Why'd you keep it?" She looked at the dress, really looked at it. "I don't know. Maybe as a reminder? Or maybe I wasn't ready to let go completely. And now..." Clara carried the dress to the window, thinking. Below, she could see the garden she'd planted, the chickens she tended, the mountains that had become her world. She thought about the woman who'd worn this dress, anxious, uncertain, trapped. That wasn't her anymore. "I should burn it," she said. "Make a clean break." "Could do that," Jed said slowly. "Or you could keep it. Not as a reminder of what you were running from, but as proof of how far you've come." Clara turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "You don't have to burn bridges to cross them," he said. "That dress, it's part of your story. The part that got you here. Nothing wrong with keeping it, long as it doesn't hold power over you anymore." She considered his words, surprised by their wisdom. "When did you get so smart?" "Had a lot of time to think up here. Made a few mistakes along the way." He gestured to the dress. "I kept Sarah's things for years. Couldn't bear to touch them, but couldn't give them away either. Thought that made me loyal. Took me a long time to understand that holding on to her things wasn't the same as honoring her memory. What changed?" "You," he said simply. "You showed me that keeping the past alive doesn't mean you can't live in the present." Clara folded the dress carefully, placed it back in the trunk. Not burning it, not throwing it away. Just putting it aside. Acknowledged, but not controlling. When she turned back to Jed, he was watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "What?" she asked. "I'm falling for you," he said, blunt, honest. "Probably already have fallen. And it scares the hell out of me." Clara's breath caught. "Jed, I know it's too soon. I know I'm still carrying Sarah with me. Probably always will in some way. I know you came here to work, not to..." He stopped, ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I just needed you to know where I stand, what I'm feeling." Clara crossed the small space between them. "You want to know what scares me? The fact that I'm not scared. I came here running from a man who wanted to control me, who tried to tell me who I should be. And now I'm falling for you, and some part of me keeps waiting for you to do the same thing. To start telling me what I can and can't do, who I should be. I would never..." "I know," she interrupted. "That's what scares me. Because it means this is real. What I feel for you, it's not gratitude or convenience or safety. It's..." She struggled to find words. "It's you. The way you look at me like I'm capable of anything. The way you listen when I talk. The way you're honest, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Jed reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered, cupping her face gently. "I can't promise I won't mess this up. I'm rusty at this. Haven't let anyone close in 5 years. I can't promise I won't panic and want to run," Clara admitted. "It's what I do when things get difficult. So we're both a mess," Jed said, and there was that smile, rare and precious. "Seems like it. Want to be a mess together?" Clara laughed, felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes, I really do." He pulled her close then, and she went willingly. They stood there in the small loft space, holding each other, the city dress forgotten in its trunk. Outside, the mountain went about its business, birds calling, wind in the pines, the endless rhythm of wildlife. Inside, 2 people who'd both been broken were learning how to be whole again. Not healed, not perfect, but whole enough to risk their hearts one more time. Summer settled over the high country with a gentleness that felt like a gift. The days stretched long and golden. The work was hard but satisfying, and Clara had never been happier. She and Jed had fallen into a new rhythm, one that included stolen moments, hands held across the table, kisses that tasted of coffee and promise. They hadn't made any formal declarations, hadn't discussed marriage or the future beyond the changing seasons. But Clara felt it in every look, every touch, every quiet moment they shared. This was home. He was home. Mrs. Abernathy visited regularly now, always with a knowing smile and some small gift, fresh eggs, a jar of her famous blackberry preserves, once a cutting from her prized rose bush. "For the garden," she'd said, winking at Clara. "Every home needs beauty. Old Tom came by with supplies, always staying for a meal, always leaving with stories to tell in town." Clara knew what they were saying, that Jed Holt was courting his housekeeper, that the grieving widower had finally come back to life. Let them talk, she thought. The truth was sweeter than any gossip. On a Tuesday in mid-July, Clara was hanging laundry when she saw a rider coming up the valley road. Not old Tom's wagon, but a single horseman moving with purpose. Something about the way he sat his horse, stiff, formal, made her uneasy. Jed came out of the barn, his hand instinctively going to the rifle he kept near the door. But when the rider got close enough to see clearly, Jed lowered the weapon. The man wore a badge, a federal marshal, Jed Holt. The marshal called as he reined in his horse. "That's me." The marshal dismounted, his eyes moving between Jed and Clara with professional assessment. "Marshal Tom Reeves. I'm looking for a Miss Clara Weston." Clara's stomach dropped. She stepped forward, her hands clenching in her apron. "I'm Clara Weston." Marshal Reeves pulled an envelope from his saddlebag, official-looking with heavy paper and a wax seal. "I have a legal summons for you, Miss Weston." From Denver, Clara took the envelope with shaking hands. The seal bore Richard Thornton's family crest. She broke it open, pulled out the formal document inside. The words swam before her eyes. Legal jargon, official stamps. But certain phrases leapt out sharp as knives. Theft of funds, sum of $5,000, willful embezzlement, required to return to Denver to answer charges. Failure to comply will result in arrest. "This is insane," Clara whispered. "I didn't steal anything." Marshal Reeves looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I'm just serving the papers. Mr. Thornton claims you were handling his business accounts, and that money went missing the same day you left Denver. He's filed formal charges." "It's a lie," Clara said, her voice stronger now, anger burning through the shock. "I kept his books, yes, but every penny was accounted for when I left. He's fabricating this because I wouldn't marry him. That may be, but I've got to follow the law. You've got 2 weeks to return to Denver and answer the charges. If you don't show," he gestured to the document. "Says it right there. Warrant for your arrest." Jed took the paper from Clara's trembling hands, reading it with growing fury. "This is harassment. The man's using the law to get back at her." "Maybe so," Reeves said, not unkindly. "But he's got paperwork, seems to have evidence. Whether it's real or fabricated, that's for a judge to decide. Miss Weston needs to go back, face this head on." "She's not going anywhere alone," Jed said flatly. Reeves looked at him with new interest. "You the Jed Holt who used to marshal up in Wyoming Territory? Before you retired up here?" Jed's jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago. Heard stories about you. Good lawman, they said. Fair but hard." Reeves glanced at Clara again. "If you're standing with her, that means something. But it doesn't change the law. She's got to answer these charges." After Reeves left, Clara stood in the yard, the legal document clutched in her hand, feeling her new life crumbling around her. This was her worst fear made real. Richard had found a way to force her back, to punish her for leaving. "I won't go," she said. "I'll run farther." "Canada, maybe. Or Clara." Jed's hands on her shoulders turned her to face him. "You can't run from this. He'll chase you forever if you do. And running makes you look guilty, but I'm not guilty. I didn't take his money. I know that. You know that. But he's got the law on his side right now, and the only way to fight it is to face it." His hands tightened gently. "And you won't face it alone. I'm coming with you." "Jed, no. I won't drag you into this. It's my mess. It stopped being just your mess the day you walked onto this homestead," he said firmly. "We're in this together now." Clara felt tears burning her eyes. "He has money, connections. What if he wins? What if they believe him over me? Then we'll fight harder." Jed pulled her close, and she buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, wood smoke and pine and mountain air. "But you need to know something first." She pulled back to look at him. "What? I wasn't always just a mountain man. Before I came up here, before I met Sarah, I was a territorial marshal for 8 years. Worked in Wyoming, Montana, even did a stint in Denver." Clara stared at him. "You never told me. Didn't seem relevant. That was another life, another man. But it means I know the law, know how these things work. And I've got connections, lawyers who owe me favors, judges who remember me. We're not going into this blind." Hope flickered in Clara's chest. "You really think we can beat this?" "I think the truth is on our side. And I think Richard Thornton is about to learn that you're not the scared woman who ran from him. You're stronger now, and you're not alone." That evening, they began preparing. Jed sent a telegram to a lawyer he'd worked with in Denver, Samuel Hargrave, a man known for his integrity and his skill in the courtroom. The response came the next day. Hargrave would take the case pro bono if necessary. "He's a good man," Jed assured Clara. "We served together on a corruption case years ago. If anyone can navigate this, it's Sam." Clara spent the next few days gathering everything she could think of that might help her case. Letters from her father's business associates, testimony from the banker who'd handled the sale of her father's property, records she'd kept of Richard's accounts, copies she'd made for herself. A practice her father had taught her. "Always keep your own records," he'd told her. "Never trust that anyone else will protect your interests." She hadn't thought about those duplicate ledgers in months. They were in the trunk with her city dress, tucked away with the past she'd been trying to leave behind. Now they might be the only thing that saved her. Mrs. Abernathy came when she heard the news, bringing with her a fierce determination. "I'll testify," she declared. "I'll tell them exactly what kind of woman you are, honest, hard-working, decent. If they think they can railroad you because you're young and alone, they've got another thing coming." Old Tom offered the same. "I've known Jed Holt for 15 years. If he says you're innocent, that's good enough for me. I'll ride to Denver myself if it helps." Their support touched Clara deeply, but she was terrified. Going back to Denver meant facing Richard, meant walking back into the world she'd escaped. What if she got there and couldn't breathe again? What if the city walls closed in and she lost herself? The night before they were set to leave, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch in the darkness, looking up at the stars scattered across the mountain sky. So many stars up here, more than she'd ever seen in the city. Out here, she'd learned to navigate by them, to read the seasons in their patterns. Jed came out and sat beside her, not saying anything, just being present. "I'm scared," Clara admitted finally. "I know. What if we lose? What if I go to jail?" We won't lose. We'll fight this with everything we have." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "But Clara, even if the worst happens, even if somehow he manages to twist the law against you, I'll be there. I'll wait as long as it takes. I'll fight until you're free. You hear me? You're not alone in this." Clara turned to look at him, this man who'd been a stranger 6 months ago, who'd become her anchor, her home. "When did you become my whole world?" she whispered. "Same time you became mine," he said, and kissed her under the mountain stars. The next morning, they packed their few belongings into saddlebags and began the long journey down from the high country. Clara looked back once at the cabin, the garden, the life they'd built together. It looked small from the distance, vulnerable, but it was hers, theirs, and she'd be damned if she'd let Richard Thornton take it from her. She'd come to these mountains running from her past. Now she was riding toward it, ready to fight. And this time, she wasn't alone. The journey down from the mountains took 3 days. 3 days of hard riding, sleeping under stars that gradually became obscured by distance and dust. With each mile they descended, Clara felt the weight of civilization pressing in. More roads, more people, more noise. The clean air of the high country gave way to the smell of coal smoke, and horse manure. Denver rose before them on the morning of the fourth day, sprawling across the plain like something that had outgrown its boundaries. Clara's stomach clenched at the sight of it. The last time she'd seen this city, she'd been fleeing in the dark, terrified and desperate. Coming back felt like walking back into a cage. Jed seemed to sense her tension. He reached over, squeezed her hand briefly. "We'll get through this, together." They went first to Samuel Hargrave's office on 16th Street. The lawyer was a man in his late 50s, with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He greeted Jed warmly, then turned his attention to Clara with a kindness that immediately put her at ease. "Miss Weston," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "Jed's told me about your situation. I want you to know, I've looked into Mr. Thornton's claims, and frankly, they're on shaky legal ground. But that doesn't mean we can take this lightly. He's a prominent man with considerable resources." They spent hours going over everything: Clara's employment with Richard, the bookkeeping she'd done, the timeline of events. Hargrave asked pointed questions, making notes in careful handwriting. "These duplicate ledgers you kept," he said, studying the books Clara had brought. "This is excellent. Shows every account balanced through your last day of employment. And you say Thornton didn't know you kept copies?" "No. It was a practice my father taught me, but I never mentioned it to Richard. He wouldn't have liked it. He was very controlling about his business affairs." Hargrave nodded thoughtfully. "Control. That's the key word here, isn't it? This isn't really about $5,000. It's about a man who doesn't like losing control over what he considers his property." The words made Clara's skin crawl, but she recognized the truth in them. "The hearing is set for 3 days from now," Hargrave continued. "In the meantime, I'm going to do some investigating. Talk to people who worked with Thornton. Look into his financial records. If there's anything questionable in his books, I'll find it." They found lodging at a modest hotel near the courthouse. Separate rooms. Jed was careful about Clara's reputation, even here where no one knew them. But that first night, Clara lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, surrounded by city sounds that felt harsh and alien after months of mountain silence. A soft knock came at her door, near midnight. She opened it to find Jed standing in the hallway, still fully dressed. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No, you?" "Kept thinking about you over here alone, worrying." Clara stepped back, let him in. They sat together on the small settee by the window, looking out at the gas lamps lighting the street below. "I hate it here," Clara said softly. "I'd forgotten how much I hate the noise, the crowds, the way everything feels pressed in and artificial. We'll go home soon as this is done," Jed promised. "Home," Clara repeated, tasting the word. "That's what the mountain is now." "When did that happen?" "Probably the first day," Jed said with a slight smile. "You just didn't know it yet." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Jed reached up, his hand going to the leather cord around his neck, the one that had always held Sarah's ring. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Show you something." He pulled the cord over his head, but when he opened his palm, it was empty. The ring was gone. Clara looked at him questioningly. "I took it off," Jed said quietly, "the night before we left. Went up to Sarah's grave and," he paused, swallowed hard. "I told her I was ready to let go. Not to forget her, never that, but to stop living in the past. To choose life again. Choose love again." Tears pricked Clara's eyes. "Jed, I love you, Clara." The words came out raw, honest, inevitable. "I think I started loving you the day you showed up at my homestead, with blisters on your feet and determination in your eyes. I fought it for months, told myself it was too soon, I wasn't ready. But the truth is, Sarah wouldn't have wanted me to stop living. She'd have kicked my backside for grieving so long." Clara laughed through her tears. "I love you too. I've been afraid to say it, afraid it was too fast, too complicated. It is fast. It is complicated." Jed cupped her face in his hands. "And I don't care. We'll figure it out as we go. But I need you to know, whatever happens in that courtroom, whatever comes next, I'm with you. Not as your employer, not as your protector, as the man who loves you and wants to build a life with you." They kissed then, deep and slow, tasting salt from tears and promise from words finally spoken. When they pulled apart, Jed pressed something into Clara's hand. She looked down to find a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple gold, with a single small sapphire that caught the lamplight. "It's not much," Jed said. "Had the blacksmith in town help me make it before we left. The stone was my grandmother's, only valuable thing I own besides the homestead. It's perfect," Clara whispered, slipping it onto her finger. It fit like it had been made for her. "Maybe it had been. I'm not proposing," Jed said quickly. "Not officially. Not until all this is settled and you're free from Thornton's shadow. But I wanted you to have it, as a promise, that when this is over, I'm going to ask you properly. And I'm hoping you'll say yes." "I'll say yes," Clara said, fresh tears streaming. "Right now, I'll say yes. Let's get through the hearing first. Then we'll make plans." He kissed her forehead gently. "Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow we prepare for battle." After he left, Clara lay in bed, the ring on her finger catching the moonlight through the window. She thought about Sarah, about the woman who'd loved Jed first, who'd made a home with him in the wilderness. Part of her would always wonder if she was somehow betraying that memory by wearing this ring, by loving this man. But then she remembered Jed's words. Sarah wouldn't have wanted him to stop living. And Clara chose to believe that, chose to honor the woman who'd come before, by loving the man she'd left behind with everything she had. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Her grave worked tirelessly, gathering witnesses, building their case. Mrs. Abernathy and old Tom arrived in Denver, ready to testify. Even the banker who'd handled her father's estate came forward, willing to speak on her behalf. "You've got good people standing with you," Hargrave told her. "That counts for something." On the evening before the hearing, Hargrave came to their hotel with news. "I've been digging into Thornton's finances," he said, laying papers on the table. "Found some interesting discrepancies. It appears Mr. Thornton has been involved in some questionable land deals. Nothing criminal necessarily, but definitely unethical. And his personal accounts show regular large withdrawals, gambling debts, from what I can determine. So he might have taken the money himself," Jed said. "It's possible. At the very least, it establishes that he had motive and opportunity. If we can show the judge that his accusations are merely a smokescreen to cover his own financial improprieties, we win," Clara finished. "Let's not count our chickens yet," Hargrave cautioned. "Thornton's lawyer is good, and they'll fight dirty, but we've got truth on our side. That has to count for something." That night, Clara couldn't eat, couldn't sit still. She paced her hotel room until Jed knocked, and they went for a walk through the city streets. Despite the crowds and noise, Clara felt calmer with him beside her. "What if we lose?" she asked. "What if the judge believes Richard? Then we appeal. We fight until there's nothing left to fight with." Jed stopped, turned her to face him. "But Clara, listen to me. Even in the worst possible outcome, even if somehow you end up facing jail time, which won't happen, you're not the same woman who fled this city 6 months ago. You're stronger now. You know who you are, what you're capable of. No one can take that from you," Clara nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. "When this is over, when we go back to the mountain, I want to marry you. Not because I need protection or security, but because I choose you. Every day I choose you." "I choose you too," Jed said. "Every day for the rest of our lives." They returned to the hotel as the city settled into restless sleep. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation Clara had been dreading. Tomorrow she would face Richard Thornton and his lies. Tomorrow she would fight for her freedom, her reputation, her future. But tonight she wore Jed's ring on her finger and carried his love in her heart. And somehow that made everything else bearable. She thought of the mountains waiting for them, the homestead that had become home, the life they were building together. That was worth fighting for, worth facing anything. For Clara slept that night with one hand on her chest, feeling the weight of Sarah's brass lantern beneath her nightgown. A reminder to be a light in the darkness. Tomorrow she would need every bit of that light. Tomorrow she would shine. The Denver courthouse stood imposing against the morning sky, all stone columns and heavy doors designed to intimidate. Clara climbed the steps with Jed on one side and Samuel Hargrave on the other, Mrs. Abernathy and old Tom following close behind. She wore her simplest dress, not the silk from her trunk, but plain cotton that spoke of honest work and mountain living. The courtroom was already half full. Curious onlookers, supporters of Richard who'd come to watch, and a few reporters scribbling in notebooks. And there at the front, sitting beside his expensively dressed lawyer, was Richard Thornton himself. He looked exactly as Clara remembered. Polished, handsome, every hair in place. When his eyes met hers, she saw the flash of triumph. He thought he'd already won. Thought she'd come crawling back, ready to beg forgiveness. Clara lifted her chin, met his gaze steadily, and watched his confident expression falter. She was not the woman he remembered. Judge Harrison Blackwell took the bench, a stern man in his 60s, with a reputation for fairness, but no tolerance for wasting his time. He reviewed the papers before him, then looked up. This is a hearing on charges of theft brought by Mr. Richard Thornton against Miss Clara Weston. Mr. Thornton, your lawyer may present your case. Richard's lawyer, a slick man named Dalton Pierce, stood and launched into his opening statement. He painted Clara as a woman scorned, bitter over a broken engagement, who'd stolen $5,000 out of spite. He presented bank records showing the missing money, testimony from Richard's business partner confirming Clara had access to the accounts, and a timeline that appeared damning. Miss Weston left Denver on March 15th, Pierce said dramatically. That very same day, $5,000 disappeared from Mr. Thornton's business account. The coincidence is impossible to ignore. Clara's hands clenched in her lap. It was all lies, but Pierce was good. He made it sound plausible, made her sound vindictive and desperate. When Pierce finished, Judge Blackwell turned to Hargrave. Counselor, your response? Hargrave stood calm and measured. Your Honor, the prosecution's case rests entirely on circumstantial evidence and convenient timing. What they haven't presented is any proof that Miss Weston actually took this money. No witness saw her access the account after her resignation. No evidence shows her spending or depositing such a sum. What we have is an accusation from a jilted suitor, because make no mistake, it was Mr. Thornton who was rejected, not the other way around. He called Clara to the stand first. She walked to the witness chair on shaking legs, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Hargrave's questions were gentle but thorough. He had Clara explain her role in Richard's business, her careful bookkeeping practices, her reasons for leaving Denver. Miss Weston, did you at any time steal money from Mr. Thornton? No, sir, I did not. Did you have access to his business accounts? I kept the books, yes, but I never had authority to withdraw funds. Only Mr. Thornton and his partner, Mr. Chambers, had that authority. Pierce jumped in with his cross-examination, trying to rattle her. Isn't it true that you were angry at Mr. Thornton for ending your engagement? He didn't end it. I did, after he discovered your theft. I discovered his plans to sell my father's property without my consent and use my bookkeeping skills while preventing me from pursuing my own career. I left because I refused to be controlled. Pierce's eyes narrowed. Yet you expect this court to believe you didn't take revenge by stealing from him. I don't expect anything, Clara said, her voice steady. I expect the truth to speak for itself. I kept duplicate records of every transaction. Every penny was accounted for when I left. If money disappeared after I was gone, perhaps the court should ask who else had access to those accounts. Judge Blackwell leaned forward with interest. Duplicate records? Hargrave stood. Your Honor, Miss Weston maintained her own set of ledgers, a standard bookkeeping practice. She's brought them with her today. He presented the ledgers, and the judge studied them carefully. Clara watched Richard's face go pale as he realized what she had. These show all accounts balanced through March 15th, the judge observed. The day Miss Weston claims she left Denver. Exactly, Your Honor, Hargrave said. Which means if money disappeared, it did so after she was no longer in Denver. Pierce scrambled. She could have falsified these records. With respect, Hargrave interrupted, the dates on these entries correspond with bank deposits and withdrawals from months prior. Unless Miss Weston had the foresight to plan a theft months in advance and create false records to cover it. These ledgers are genuine, But the real blow came when Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out her father's watch, the one possession she'd carried with her from Denver. She held it up for the judge to see. "My father gave me this watch before he died," she said. "There's an inscription inside. May I show you?" The judge nodded, and Clara opened the case. Inside, beneath the watch mechanism, was her father's handwriting. "To my dearest Clara, on the occasion of her departure for new opportunities. March 8th, 1885. May time always be on your side." "March 8th, Clara said clearly. "A full week before Mr. Thornton claims his money disappeared. My father knew I was leaving. I'd already made my plans. This watch proves I left when I said I did, before any money went missing." The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversation. Judge Blackwell studied the watch inscription, then looked hard at Richard Thornton. "Mr. Thornton, can you explain this discrepancy in the timeline?" Richard stood, his composure cracking. The inscription could have been backdated. "There's no way to verify." "I can verify it," a voice called from the back of the courtroom. An elderly man stood, leaning heavily on a cane. "I'm Jacob Zimmerman, the jeweler who engraved that watch. I keep records of all my work. I engraved those words on March 7th. My ledger will show it." Judge Blackwell's expression hardened. "Counselor Pierce, your timeline appears to have some significant holes in it." But Hargrave wasn't finished. He called character witnesses, Mrs. Abernathy, who testified to Clara's honest work and good character. Old Tom, who spoke of her reputation in the mountain community. The banker, who'd handled her father's estate, who confirmed she'd received no unusual sums of money in recent months. Then Hargrave dropped his final piece of evidence. "Your Honor, I've taken the liberty of investigating Mr. Thornton's financial affairs. With the court's permission, I'd like to present some findings that I believe are relevant to this case." Pierce objected strenuously, but the judge allowed it. Hargrave presented documentation showing Richard's gambling debts, his questionable land deals, and, most damning, large cash withdrawals from his business account in the weeks after Clara left. Withdrawals that roughly matched the amount he claimed was stolen. "It appears," Hargrave said carefully, "that Mr. Thornton needed to explain missing funds from his business. What better scapegoat than a woman who'd left his employment and rejected his marriage proposal?" Richard shot to his feet. "This is preposterous. Those withdrawals were legitimate business expenses. Then you should have no trouble providing documentation for them," the judge said coldly. "Mr. Pierce, does your client have receipts for these transactions?" Pierce looked at Richard, who'd gone pale and silent. "Your Honor, that is, Mr. Thornton would need time to gather." "I thought not." Judge Blackwell looked at the papers before him, then at Richard with clear disgust. "Mr. Thornton, I've been a judge for 23 years. I've seen many cases of men using the law to control women who defied them. This appears to be one of the most blatant examples I've encountered." He turned to Clara. "Miss Weston, these charges against you are without merit. Not only have you demonstrated that you left Denver before any money disappeared, but you've shown meticulous record-keeping that proves your honesty. Meanwhile, Mr. Thornton's own financial records raise serious questions about his credibility." The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Case dismissed. All charges against Miss Clara Weston are dropped with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring Mr. Thornton's financial affairs to the district attorney for investigation. If he's falsified these theft claims, he may face charges of perjury and filing a false police report." Richard's face went from pale to red. "You can't, she's lying." "Sir, I suggest you sit down and consult with your lawyer before you say anything else that might incriminate you further." The courtroom erupted. Clara sat stunned, unable to quite believe it was over. Jed was there instantly, pulling her up, wrapping his arms around her. "It's done," he murmured into her hair. "You're free." Hargrave shook their hands, grinning broadly. "Well done, Miss Weston. Your father taught you well with those duplicate ledgers. That's what won this case." As they left the courtroom, Richard tried to approach, but Jed stepped between them. For a moment, the two men faced each other. Richard, polished and deflated. Jed, solid and protective. "Stay away from her," Jed said quietly. "If I hear you've so much as spoken her name again, I'll make sure every newspaper in Denver knows what you tried to do here today." Richard's jaw worked, but he had no response. He turned and walked away, Pierce hurrying after him, and Clara knew with absolute certainty that she'd never see him again. Outside the courthouse, in the warm summer sun, Mrs. Abernathy hugged Clara fiercely. "Knew you'd win, dear. Truth always comes out in the end." "Thank you," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you. I couldn't have done this without you." Old Tom tipped his hat. "Heading back up the mountain now, Miss Clara?" "As fast as our horses can carry us," Jed answered for her, his arm around her shoulders. That evening they had a quiet celebration dinner at the hotel. Hargrave joined them, raising his glass in a toast. "To Clara Weston, a woman of integrity who stood up for herself and won. To justice," Mrs. Abernathy added. "To coming home," Clara said softly, looking at Jed. Later, in the privacy of her hotel room, Clara held her father's pocket watch, running her thumb over the inscription. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered. "You protected me even after you were gone." The watch had saved her. The duplicate ledgers her father taught her to keep had vindicated her. But more than that, the strength and independence he'd instilled in her had given her the courage to fight. Tomorrow, they would start the journey back to the mountains, back to the homestead, the garden, the life she'd built, back to where she belonged. But tonight, Clara was simply grateful. Grateful for truth, for justice, for the people who'd stood beside her. And most of all, grateful for the man who loved her enough to walk into her storm and help her find her way through it. The journey back to the mountains felt different from the descent. Clara and Jed rode side by side, the summer sun warm on their backs, and with each mile that took them higher, Clara felt the weight of the city falling away. By the time they reached the high country, she could breathe fully again. The homestead appeared like a vision, the cabin solid and welcoming, the garden thriving even in their absence, the chickens scratching happily in their pen. Everything was exactly as they'd left it, yet somehow it looked different, more precious, more like home. Mrs. Abernathy had ridden ahead and left fresh bread and milk in the cabin, along with a note, "Welcome home. Come to supper tomorrow. I won't take no for an answer. Love, Ida." That first evening back, Clara and Jed sat on the porch as the sun set behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Neither spoke for a long time. There was no need. They were home. Finally, Jed reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. "Been meaning to give you this. Commissioned it before we left for Denver. Picked it up from the blacksmith while you were saying goodbye to Mrs. Abernathy." Clara unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a ring, simple, strong, made of hand-forged steel with a single band of copper running through it like a river. It was beautiful in its simplicity, nothing like the ostentatious engagement ring Richard had given her. "It's not fancy," Jed said, suddenly uncertain. "But the blacksmith used steel from an old plough blade, copper from the mine over the ridge. Pieces of this mountain, of this life. Thought that meant something?" "It means everything," Clara whispered, slipping it onto her finger beside the sapphire ring. The two fit together perfectly, as if they'd always been meant to rest side by side. Jed took a breath, then slid off the porch railing and down onto one knee in front of her. Clara's heart stuttered. "Clara Weston," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "6 months ago you walked onto my land with blisters on your feet and fire in your eyes. You told me you weren't here to marry, you were here to work. And I said there was no room for quitters." Clara laughed through sudden tears. "You've worked harder than any person I've ever known. You've brought this place back to life, brought me back to life. You've faced down your past with courage I can barely comprehend. And somewhere along the way, you became the reason I wake up in the morning. The reason I want to see tomorrow." He took her hand. "I'm not asking you to marry me because I need a housekeeper, or because it's proper, or because of what anyone else might think. I'm asking because I love you, because I choose you every day for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Clara said, pulling him up, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I told you I'd say yes." They held each other as the stars began to appear overhead. The same stars that had guided Clara to this mountain, to this man, to this life. The wedding took place 2 weeks later on the hillside above the homestead. Mrs. Abernathy officiated, She was a justice of the peace. She'd informed them, had been for 15 years. Old Tom stood as witness, along with a handful of neighbors from the valley who'd come to celebrate. Clara wore a simple cream dress she'd sewn herself, wildflowers in her hair. Jed wore his best shirt, the one Clara had mended with such care months ago. They stood with the mountains at their backs and spoke vows they'd written themselves. "I came here looking for safety," Clara said, her voice steady and clear. "I found so much more. I found home. I found purpose. I found a partner who sees me as I truly am and loves me not despite my independence, but because of it. I vow to stand beside you through every season, the harsh winters and the gentle springs. I vow to work with you, laugh with you, and build a life that honors both our pasts while creating something entirely new." Jed's vow was simpler, but no less heartfelt. "I was lost when you found me, stuck in grief, frozen in time, half alive at best. You thawed something in me I thought was dead forever. You reminded me that loving someone new doesn't mean forgetting someone old. You showed me that the heart has room for both memory and hope. I vow to honor your strength, support your dreams, and love you with everything I am, for all the days I'm given." When Mrs. Abernathy pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering cheered. Jed kissed Clara as the mountain winds swept around them. Carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers and possibility, the celebration afterward was simple but joyful. A meal shared on makeshift tables in the meadow. Fiddle music from one of the valley men, dancing as the sun set. Clara found herself pulled from partner to partner, laughing and breathless, happier than she'd ever imagined possible. As the evening wound down and their neighbors departed, Clara and Jed stood together in the doorway of their cabin now truly theirs. "Tired?" Jed asked. "Wonderfully so," Clara said, leaning into him. "It's been quite a journey." "It has." Clara thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The fear, the grief, the courage it had taken for both of them to risk their hearts again. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For being exactly who you are. For not trying to change me. For standing beside me instead of in front of me." Jed kissed her forehead gently. "Thank you for teaching me how to live again." They went inside together, closing the door on the mountain night. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over the cabin that had transformed from a lonely bachelor's dwelling into a real home. Clara noticed small things she'd added over the months. Curtains she'd sewn, herbs drying from the rafters, the carved bear on a shelf, wildflowers in Sarah's vase. 2 lives woven together. 2 wounded people who'd found healing in shared work, honest conversation, and the slow building of trust. Jed pulled Clara into his arms, and they swayed slowly to music only they could hear. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging. Inside, everything had changed. "Welcome home, Mrs. Holt," Jed murmured against her hair. Clara smiled, her heart full. "I've been home since the day I arrived. I just didn't know it yet." She thought about the woman who'd fled Denver in the dark, desperate, alone, running from a life that didn't fit. That woman seemed like a stranger now. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who knew her own worth, someone who'd learned that home isn't a place you find. It's something you build, brick by brick, day by day, with someone who sees you and loves you exactly as you are. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. And in the quiet of the mountain night, 2 people who'd both been lost began the rest of their lives together. Not as employer and employee, not as 2 separate souls sharing space, but as partners, equals, husband and wife. They'd both come to the mountain carrying ghosts. But in finding each other, they'd learned the most important truth of all. The past doesn't have to define you. It's what you build from here that matters. And they were building something beautiful.